Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. The case that captivated the Coachella Valley and San Francisco Bay Area for years. Author Sherrie Lueder and her literary team, Taarud-Martinez and Kim Hansen, along with Tysons Wrench, a former friend, now victim of the con man, unravel the threads of a decade-long crime spree filled with twists, turns, and shocking revelations. Filled with a cast of characters drawn from San Francisco's Castro district, the Dark Prince and the Boiz take you from one con to the next until a single brazen act leads to murder. However, the story doesn't end there. However, the story doesn't end there. There are the dramatic courtroom trials that no one predicted and the shocking ending that no one expected, not even the judge. The book that we're featuring this evening is Until Someone Gets Hurt, by Sherrie Lueder and Tysons Wrench, and my guest this evening is Tysons Wrench. Welcome to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Tysons Wrench.
Dan, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I hope that's the pronunciation of your name. I should have checked beforehand.
Yeah, no, it's just like a wrench.
There you go. Thanks. Okay, now let's get to this wild story, and for our audience, I don't think it's explained in there so well, but you were friends with the people that are the main characters in this story, and then you end up being a victim, and so you can tell us how you became a victim, and this is the fascinating story, and it's a unique perspective because of who you are and your relationship to the characters in this, including a murderer. So let's get right to this incredible story, Until Someone Gets Hurt, and you're the co-author along with Sherrie Lueder.
Yes.
Now let's start off with. Pardon me?
No, go ahead.
Oh, and now I wanted to start our interview basically the same way you unfold the relationships in this book, because there's a lot of characters. And it's fairly complex compared to some of the stories that we deal with. It's really best to keep this focus, and we'll start our interview with how you start your book. And tell us where you are on March 5th, 2007, and under what circumstances you had gone on a vacation. Tell us basically that, and maybe even before that, give us your background at that time. Who were you at that time? What was your profession? What was your status? And then explain what happened on March 5th and unfold this story for our audience.
Sure. Well, I was raised in Silicon Valley and obviously started my career there in the computer industry, and rode the .com boom, and just had pretty good success with everything I did, and in that process, I had moved to San Francisco, and just had a big circle of friends, and within that circle of friends was a man named Danny Garcia, and he and I had become a great friends for 5 years. My company transferred me to Europe. I moved to Germany and was there for a couple of years before the .com boom sort of came to an end, if you will, and they all needed to downsize, and I was given a fantastic parachute out of there. And, of course,
right.
The first person I called was Danny. And I said, I'm coming back to the U.S., and let's go have a good time, because that's he was that friend.
Okay, now tell us about your vacation. You've just been terminated by your company, but like you say, it's not so full. You did really, really well. You want to come back to the States anyway, or at least you're comfortable with coming back to the States, and you got a lot of money, like you say, 7-figure parachute. So now tell us about this Argentina and Brazil, this South American vacation, and tell us a little bit about that. Why you wanted to go there, and tell us about that.
I had some Germans get an amazing amount of vacation normally, and so I had gone with some of my friends and coworkers down to South America for a month-long trip, and it included a 2.5-week cruise. And at the end of the cruise, we ended up from Buenos Aires to Rio. We got to Rio. I went online and decided to go pay for some of my credit card expenses and make sure it was all done on time. And as I get to the internet cafe, I go online, and all of my bank accounts are now empty. And my first thought was really that maybe because I was in Brazil, the U.S. banks blocked it, and I just was in denial. And my friend said, no, that doesn't happen. Back to the internet cafe and look further. And I looked further, and sure enough, $4,000 a day had been withdrawn from my accounts, and I only had a $300 limit. So that was even more confusing. I contacted the bank, and they said that what I was telling them didn't make sense. And to not tell anybody I'm coming home. I just knew something wasn't right, and I did that. The airline was very accommodating because they didn't have any money, and so I had gone home a day and a half later. I discovered that someone had moved into my house, and their stuff was in my bedroom. There was all around the house, none of the things that I dug through my bedroom. I discovered that it was, in fact.
I've got to interrupt you, Tyson. We have a major connection problem here. This is why, basically, I unless this is the wackiest landline phone ever, it's almost incomprehensible, the conversation. And so I'm.
Oh, no.
It's.
Call back in.
Maybe we try to just call back in, and then unless if it doesn't clear, then we'll have to reschedule the interview, because we really can't. It's incomprehensible. So why don't you hang up, recall back in, and see if we can improve the clarity for those that are listening. So we'll do that. Go ahead and call back in, and I'll entertain the audience with my. Okay, thanks. I apologize for that technical difficulty. I do stress, and a lot of people do not have access to landline, but landline phones are really far superior to cell phones in terms of especially one thing, and if you hear this in interviews, you can see what the problem is as well, is that it seems to be a pile-up. There'll be an interference in the conversation, back and forth, a normal back-and-forth conversation. And so there's a little bit of a delay, and that's one of the problems. And it's just in better sound quality. Now we have Tyson Wrensch back on, and we'll see if this improves. I'm really hoping so. Good evening, Tyson, pardon me.
Yes, this is better?
Yes, I think so. Okay,
Great.
Sorry.
Great.
Let's go back a little bit, because I think the audience would have a hard time understanding. You are on this trip. You don't have internet access on for a couple weeks or so, or 10 days or so. You can correct me on that. You don't have internet access. You can't check your bank account. When you do check your bank account, you see that these accounts are either empty or a great amount of money is missing. Maybe you can tell us how much money you were looking at missing. You said you were initially in denial about that, but pick up on the story back at those details, please.
Yeah, no. So I'd gone online and I had a $300 withdrawal limit on my account. Now, granted, my severance package was still over in Europe. Hadn't actually been paid out on it yet. But the money that I had just saved in the U.S. And it was $4,000 a day for almost 3 weeks that they had pulled out. So it was a very large amount of money, and the airline was kind enough to let me go home unannounced. And just as I said, when I got home, I discovered that someone had moved into my house, and that was unnerving.
And who was this person?
So after digging through my bedroom and looking at the clothes and the luggage tags, I discovered that it was my best friend of 5 years, who turned out to not be who he said he was.
Now, so Danny Garcia, your friend of 5 years, while you were gone, had lock, stock, and barrel moved into your place.
He not only moved into my place, but he actually had people over to the house pretending to be me. I learned through tracking using the GPS in my car that I backtracked it, and I found people who he had gone to their homes and even showed ID with his photo and my name. And my middle name happens to be Daniel, so he just told people that he goes by his middle name. And he had people over, met the neighbors, and I travel a lot for work, so I didn't really know my neighbors. I can tell you now that I know my neighbors really well. So, but the shock that everything he had told me throughout our time together was a lie. From how he made his money, the people that he hung out with, all of his stories. But then he went so far as to then begin to isolate me from all of our friends. So, again, we were part of a big circle of friends. I, of course, reached out to them all to tell them and warn them, but he had beat me to it, and the story went that I was in South America because I was a major drug dealer, that how else would a 31-year-old have a big house in San Francisco and all the things I had to, and it made clear sense to everybody that by talking to me, they would be getting involved in some sort of DEA investigation, and so I had to clear my name somehow, and that came through the Wells Fargo bank investigation team, where I got my hands on a surveillance photo of him withdrawing money from my accounts, and that is what cleared my name. But that didn't. The problem that came after that was the fact that the police wouldn't take a report for my case because the bank gave me my money back, and therefore the bank was the victim and not me. And because of that, I was left just hanging. There was nothing I could do, and the bank said, why do you keep coming back? I'm thinking, why didn't you arrest them? If I went into your branch next door with a note that said, give me all your money, and I got $500, you'd have a SWAT team banging down my door in 10 minutes. And yet these guys got tens of thousands of dollars from you, and you don't care. And finally, a police detective said to me, he said, we have so many cases of fraud like this that our manpower is only limited to cases where people are hurt. So until someone gets hurt, they're going to continue to get away with it. And that's how we came up with that. That's how we came up with the name for the book. Okay, now we've got to go back a little bit because you opened the book with introduction on where you met Danny Garcia and the circumstances under which you did meet him. He invited you to a protest shortly after meeting each other, and then introduced you to attorneys. And I'll get you to pronounce the attorney's name, David. Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that. So tell us about the invite. Tell us about Danny Garcia's. You said everything he told, the lie, the big, huge con. I mean, this is a story of con men and talking about serious money with some serious people and an investment in conning like a lifetime of grifting. So let's go back to how you met, Danny Garcia in the protest, and who you met at the protest, and the story that was told and established in your mind at that time.
Yeah, so where Danny had sort of, I guess you could say, hooked me in was he mentioned to me that several years back that he had been molested by a very wealthy man in San Francisco by the name of Thomas White, and that he was suing him, and there was a protest coming in, and I felt sorry for the guy. I mean, it's a horrible thing that I think had happened. He claimed he'd been drugged, and so that's sort of how I don't know. You just sort of feel bad for somebody, and they seem like a nice person, and
sure.
So I went there to support him, and there was his lawyer, a man by the name of David Rupp-Logel. And the protest was basically the fact that one of the city supervisors, domestic partners, was the lawyer for Thomas White, and that this particular lawyer was basically making her money by defending a child molester. People magazine had done a story on him. The San Francisco Chronicle had done a two Sunday story on him. So everything that he was telling me was in press and print, and it was purely believable. And then following that case, they then filed a case down in Mexico. Thomas White was big into philanthropy and was building a school for underprivileged children, and 22 boys came forward and stated that Thomas White had in fact molested them, drugged them and molested them, and Thomas White was then sent to jail, and the case began to where they were going to get about $1 million a kid, and of course there was never even a trial. And believe it or not, Thomas White is still in jail. I just visited him about 3 weeks ago, and he's still there. And the 22 boys had come forward. They were all paid to say it. The lawyer in Mexico who brought the case to court was arrested and is actually in the same jail now. It's just a tragic and sad story for this man who at one point had everything, and these guys just took it from him.
Yeah, we're talking of a very wealthy man. We're talking of a billionaire, right?
In the hundreds of millionaire, I would say. Okay.
And the attorney was Carol Migden, isn't that right?
Yes.
And in the protest, what I found interesting in your book was when you talk about the placards that were at that protest were Carol Migden's family earns thousands of dollars protecting a child rapist. I mean, that's a pretty provocative placard, really.
Yeah, it got the attention of several of the newspapers, including the Bay Area Reporter. And as a result of that, I learned just in this last trip that Carol Migden's partner then basically stopped representing Tom and left him, which left him lawyerless in Mexico at the time.
Wow.
And so he had to get a new legal team. So then they proceeded to actually hack into his stock accounts. They sold the stock. They transferred the stock money to themselves and cashed out the money. When the FBI was called in, the story that I was told is that they looked at it and said, well, he's a child molester. He gets what he deserves, and we have other things to work on. So you can almost call it the perfect crime.
Mm-hmm. And this gentleman hacker was this guy they called Brain, and he was a hacker, and he was a friend of Garcia, right? Alec?
Yes, Alex Mazian, and he actually has a warrant. Mexico has listed him as one of the defendants in this extortion case that they just filed last month.
Now, tell us about I thought interesting too is the elaborate scam with the art dealer.
Yeah,
and the famous painting that they said, geez, the Nazis are pretty embarrassed by this, and the Scottish Museum or a major art gallery in Scotland wants to sell it, and it's about that.
Yeah, it was another brilliant con. They had befriended an art dealer who had a client. It was a Silicon Valley CFO executive, and he had said that he wanted this particular Tanguy painting. He did the research. It was in the gallery where they said it was. Had he done a deeper research, he would have discovered that it wasn't for sale. But this was his art dealer. This is the guy he's bought millions of dollars of paintings from in the past. So why would he lie? And but they were conning the art dealer as well. And as soon as he transferred $400,000 in escrow to verify they were going to ship the painting over and authenticate it, and it never showed up, and the CFO was not happy and began to call, and the art dealer realized that after he had transferred all $400,000 to these con men, that he had been taken, and it turns out that they all went to Las Vegas, right here, and blew all the money at the Bellagio. And since it was Las Vegas, I ended up getting the tax forms for all the greater than $1,200 wins that they had when they were playing the $100 slot machines.
Yeah, incredible amount of money they spent in a few days, right?
Amazing, yes.
Yeah. And what was their next course of business after that? After they blew through that money?
So they had a couple of other scams going. They very much assembly lined them. They were almost all going at the same time at some point. But there was a Japanese tourist that Kushal, and I should maybe just elaborate a little bit on Kushal Narula.
Right. Yeah. Introduce him.
He was a Nepalese immigrant. He came on a student visa. He basically came and told everybody that he was a prince. He was the Prince of Nepal. And he had everybody fooled. He had a British accent. He dressed well. He was very charming, very royal in his mannerisms. It was believable. And so in that process, he had actually conned the new college of San Francisco into believing that he was a prince and that his family was going to donate a lot of money to the college. And
$1 million.
They budgeted that $1 million and spent it, and suddenly the money didn't show up. And after 37 years, New College of San Francisco had to close its doors. And but yet Kushal remained in the country on an expired student visa now. But he managed to travel around, and he went to Hawaii, met this Japanese tourist who expressed a desire to have a visa to live in the U.S., and Kushal had said, hey, if you invest in real estate, then I can get you your visa. And so she opened an account at the Bank of Hawaii. She transferred $500,000 from her account in Japan, and Kushal had taken, when you open a new account and they give you those temporary checks, so Kushal managed to tear a few of those out while she wasn't looking, and then wrote himself $500,000-ish in checks, which he transferred to his Bank of Hawaii account at the same bank. So the lady gets wind of it, and she calls in, and the bank basically sticks up for Kushal and says, no, he's a good guy. His parents are diplomats. Surely there's a mistake. And she's begging for them to call the police, and they wouldn't. So that case is actually still in dispute. But again, here's a woman who's out $500,000, and now Kushal is living the life, along with Danny and David, and they are now a good grifter team that is out on the rampage. And
what's the next stop and next scam and victim?
Yes, So, there was a man in Marin County they had befriended, and befriended him separately. Danny got to know him well. Kushal had actually stayed at his house. Well, Danny knew that this man had quite a bit of jewelry in his house, $300,000 worth. And when Kushal had stayed there, Kushal stole it. And in a weird case, and I'm not exactly sure, why this happened, but Danny turned Kushal in, and Kushal was arrested for the jewelry theft, and then immediately bailed out by David Replogle. Just a weird twist that I still can't explain. And but what happened was I had gotten a phone call from a friend of mine who said, hey, my roommate is going to Hawaii tomorrow with Danny, and you had mentioned he's a bad guy, and do you have any proof? So I discovered this jewelry heist, and I contacted the victim in Marin County. He proceeded to tell me what happened. I told him my story, and I asked if he knew where Danny was, and he said that Danny had been spending a lot of time in Palm Springs, and that a friend of his there had gone missing. And something didn't sit right with me when he told me that, and I began a search and discovered that a man named Cliff Lambert, 74 years old, in the Las Palmas neighborhood of Palm Springs, had gone missing in December of 2008, and this is now February of 2009, and there's been nothing done. It's still a missing person case. Well, you know how you go online and you see stories and news articles, and then people can leave the comments under the blog section?
Sure, sure.
And they usually have nothing to do with the article. They're almost comical when you read them.
Sure.
But there was one in particular that said the last person I saw him with was a very well-dressed Indian male with a British accent, which describes Kushal to a T. And so I logged on. I created a fake anonymous name, and I left a posting. And I said, the people you were looking for are Danny Garcia, David Replogle, and Kushal Narula, the man you described in your response. And immediately following that, somebody had posted a photo. It was the mugshot photo of Kushal from his jewelry heist, and it turned out it was a private investigator who was following the case. And about 2 hours later, both my posting and the mugshot posting were deleted from the website. I contacted the website administrator, and she wrote back to me that they had threatened to shut down the entire website that was devoted to missing people from around the world. And then I knew something was definitely up, so I called the Palm Springs Police Department, and then the story unravels from there. The detective, I told him my story. Detective Browning was his name, and was very kind, and he just said, Tyson, you need to come down here. We need to talk. And I was very excited. I thought, wow, there's something, finally somebody's going to do something, and I had no idea what I was getting into, but as I drove down, and I took everything that they had left in my house from 2 years ago, and I brought it to them. We had an interview with another detective, and I had my police reports that I'd finally gotten after being persistent enough, and they thanked me, and I left, and I just was sort of left like, well, now what? And then a week later, they contacted me, and they basically thanked me for coming in, and they wanted to let me know that they had gone out and arrested everyone, and they've amended the case now to a murder case. And the murder and the story that follows is one that I don't know that California has seen, even in its court cases. But they after they had murdered Cliff Lambert, they had actually sold his house and emptied his accounts very much in the same way, same pattern that they did to me. And the district attorney investigator said that I was very, very lucky that I came home early from my trip, because Mr. Lambert did not. He came home on time. and they had everything was planned out for him.
Right. So do you really believe, even though that it sounds a good possibility given what they did later, but do you think they really that Danny and the trio would have killed you and at that point, or do you have any kind of explanation why they graduated to murder if they are really essentially grifters, con men?
Yeah. So it's the general consensus is that was a great possibility. We learned from their text messages that they did hire somebody for, I think it was $30,000 to they hired a hit on me, but fortunately they owed that guy money anyhow, and so he didn't do it, obviously. He took the money, and so it was just criminals against criminals, and no honor among thieves, I guess. But the manner in which they murdered him, it was a horrific murder. They had hired a couple of hitmen, and one of the hitmen turned state's evidence and actually told us everything. So they told the state everything, and I will.
Tell us about. Pardon me.
Go ahead.
Well, I'd like, unless you have some reservations, I'd like you to tell us about the murder and the plot to murder, and what exactly happened and why. Tell us about that.
Sure. So, I guess from what we understand is that Cliff Lambert had met Danny on Craigslist, and Cliff, was a 74-year-old man. He liked younger men and would occasionally fly them in or have them come over and stay for the weekend. And then just like the company, his good friends were younger men, the ones who reported him missing, really nice guys. But Danny, in the process of staying at his house, managed to gather all kinds of information on him, and even accessed his computer. Danny was very good with a computer. Cliff was 74. He left his passwords all written out. Nothing really secure, but nothing he ever thought he probably had to worry about. And Danny had everything. When they did the forensics on his phone, he had under his contacts where you and I would have, maybe our names, our phone numbers, our address, and our birthday. He had, on top of that, his Social Security number, his credit card numbers, where he went to college, when he graduated, his security alarm code, everything you could ever want to know about somebody, he had it in his contacts. And so as they tried to murder him twice. They actually hired two guys. They hired a bartender from San Francisco and hired him for $30,000. He managed to talk his roommate into joining, and they went down to Palm Springs and broke into his garage and waited for him to come home. They had no murder weapons when they entered. They grabbed some pruning shears and a screwdriver, and one waited in the rafters and one waited behind his other car. And he came home, and they both chickened out. And he went from his house, went from his car right into his house, not knowing that he, almost met his fate. Well, Couchal, who had hired them, was incensed. He was outraged. Well, one of the things that Danny had learned in spending time with Cliff is that he was in a dispute over a will, and the will was a New York case. So Couchal went out and got a pay-as-you-go cell phone that had a New York area code. He called Cliff and told him that he was a lawyer and that he had come to a resolution with the will, and that Cliff was going to be a wealthy man, and he was coming down to sign the paperwork. And as Couchal shows up, and they had actually gone ahead and contacted the alarm company claiming that the backdoor sensor was faulty and kept calling the police, so please turn it off. And so the alarm company remotely disabled the rear door alarm.
Yeah.
And as Cushall takes a tour of the house, he unlocks the back door, and the two hitmen, Miguel Bustamante and Craig McCarthy, both enter into the kitchen, again unarmed, and Cliff hears some commotion and comes into his kitchen, and he sees McCarthy. McCarthy bear hugs him, and then he's, what are you guys doing here? What are you doing in my house? And Bustamante grabbed a paring knife from the kitchen block, and McCarthy pushed him away, and Bustamante then stabbed him in the back of the neck, just below the skull, and the blade actually broke in his vertebrae, and he went down. Then Bustamante grabbed a couple more knives out of the kitchen block, and just proceeded to sort of left, right, and Cliff basically laid there, and as he was breathing his last breath, gurgling, Cushall enters the room and begins to order them to grab his rings, his watch, his wallet, all of the basically, as the district attorney said, they picked him like vultures. As he lay there dying, and they never found the body. They wrapped up the body in sheets. They claimed they had buried it somewhere in the town of Fontana off of Interstate 10. When they went out to go where the body was supposed to be, it was no longer there, and the body was never found.
Oh. Now, how did they get around to, when they make the arrests, how do the police, I guess this is interesting, how do the police get around to getting a person that, obviously somebody's revealed this intimate information, and usually it's not all three people simultaneously at once. So when they made the arrest, how did they get the information that we just mentioned right now?
Right. So the murder was actually reenacted by Craig McCarthy. He had just gotten out of the U.S. Marines, and he felt an extreme amount of remorse. He, in fact, when McCarthy gave him his share of the money for the job, he supposedly refused it. And then while he was in jail, he happened to talk to his cellmate, and his cellmate was sort of, I guess you could call the prison rat. He was the tank boss.
Snitch,
yeah. So he used that information, went to the warden and said, "Hey, I got some information," and using it as basically a token for him to maybe get a lighter sentence or get a strike removed or something. Then proceeded to befriend McCarthy and tell him that he would be able to get McCarthy out of this. And so McCarthy drew a map, and of course they turned that in, and then through the process of charging them with murder, the district attorney decided to go with a life without charge, and they gave McCarthy the option to turn state's evidence in exchange for 25 years. And so he actually reenacted the entire murder in the house, and that was videotaped. So that's how we know from the court hearings and so forth of exactly what happened.
How far did he go in the reenactments? Was it the actual? Did they get him to do the stabbing? I guess this is a slam dunk when you get a prosecutor to have something like this. But tell us about the extent of the reenactment.
Yeah, so it was and because McCarthy wasn't the one who did the stabbing, he just sort of guided them through. He was using the other people who were there as sort of mannequins, or not mannequins, but just as examples of what went down. And it was just clear. The other bit of evidence that sunk them was their text messages. There were over 31,000 text messages before, during, and after the murder. And the one thing that a lot of people don't know is that while your text messages are recorded, which we all know, it's saved on a server somewhere, your geographical location when you send or receive them is also recorded. And the prosecution was able to put together a map that detailed them going down from they went down from San Francisco to Palm Springs, and then the murder happened, and then they went back, and then they went back down to empty the accounts, and then sell his house as well.
Now, people with money and people in dire straits, whether they have, or people who have friends with money, get representation that helps them at least, even though, so what kind of representation do these people eventually get? What kind of tell us about kind of the names, the kind of representation they got.
Yeah, well, in the case of Danny Garcia and Kushal Narula, their lawyers were Danny Garcia and Kushal Narula. They chose to represent themselves, and in which there's that famous saying, the client that has a lawyer or acts as a lawyer has a client for a fool, or something like that.
That's right. That's right.
And you would think that would be a stupid move, and yet we know that about halfway through the trial, they had actually gotten the state of California to give them over $600,000, and we think at the end of the trial it was close to $1 million in support for their defense investigators, their advisors. They got brand new MacBook Pros to work at their case on because the computer in the jail was too slow. They were also had Starbucks delivered in court every day. Thanks to the California taxpayer. So it is it's just mind-boggling. And the Attorney General for the state of California, Kamala Harris, even was quoted as saying that the theatrics and the complexity of these cons and their crimes are beyond any Hollywood script. And it's true. It's just everything about these guys, how they continued to get away with it. And then even when they got caught, they continued to proceed with their cons and just getting everything given to them. It's just amazing. They even, Danny filed a civil suit against the district attorney who was prosecuting him, Lisa DiMaria. And Danny claimed that she had violated his civil rights by listening to his privileged phone calls. And you get two kinds of privileged phone calls in jail, and that's between you and your lawyer and you and your spiritual guide. Well, the DA had listened to a call between Danny and his mother. Well, his mother had gone and gotten her reverendship and has now become Danny's spiritual advisor. Now, the case was eventually thrown out because there's a code that you punch in, and if Danny was really a lawyer, he would have known that that's how you stop the DA from listening to your calls. So the case was dismissed as Danny's pure ignorance. But nonetheless, again, everything he could do to distract the state, the prosecution, they were just trying to trip up any way they can. There were over 100 pre-trial hearings, just 3.5 years that it took, which is just far longer than it ever should have. Right.
Now, it's really testament of their, like you say, getting Starbucks delivered and being able to get that kind of money for this kind of case. I mean, they've given death penalty cases a whole lot less money than that, for a whole team. And so it's just really testament of their abilities as con men. And with the other one we didn't mention too is that the woman from Japan, the Japanese woman, she caught him stealing, and yet he still conned some more money out of her. Isn't that what you have in the book?
Yeah. It's unbelievable that with Couchon's ability, and he even is quoted in one of his texts as saying that even after I've conned someone, I can con them again. And he did that with the Megumi, and that after he had taken her money, he claimed that he was sorry and that he needed it because his family had been kidnapped. His sister was kidnapped in Nepal, and they needed the money for ransom. But of course, his family was royalty, and that she would get that money back. That he just needed to borrow it. And sure enough, he gave her a check for $800 and something thousand, which she deposited. And then Couchon had convinced her that now she was in danger, and that he needed another $40,000 to get her. That they found out that she was involved, and so sure enough, she cuts him another $41,000 check, and 3 days later, his $800,000 check bounces. And so she's out even more money. I mean, it's just it's mind-boggling. I feel bad that she fell for it, but he's that convincing.
Now, the one thing we didn't talk about is that you did a fair amount of work on your own to be able to bring these people to justice. You were pretty persistent, and you do have a background in private investigation yourself. Tell us just a little bit about how much of an ordeal it was for you to reestablish yourself and straighten things out, and also get this validation that you were right all along, and that tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, no, I had worked my way through college with a private investigation firm that was a white-collar crime investigation, so a lot of the high-tech stuff. And I had quite a few resources in law enforcement that I was able to call and get advice from. What I think was the most interesting one was the fact that a friend of mine had said, Tyson, there is going to be a body at the end of this. And he says, it might be yours, it might be his, it might be somebody else, but there will be a body, and it's shocking to know that a few years later there was. But there's the banks do offer extra methods of security. You can have verbal passwords when you go to the banks to withdraw money. There are a lot of ways to do it. These guys just they figured their way around it. They did a fake power of attorney to sell Cliff Lambert's house, and then they even tried to take out the notary who had done the power of attorney. So it was really difficult to recover from something like that emotionally. I think physically I was able to get all the passwords done, but I think emotionally it's I still have trust issues,
right,
but it's probably for the better. Probably for the better in that sense. Go ahead.
Now, you attending the trial and being involved in the trial and seeing Danny Garcia and defending himself and tell us a little bit more about that phenomena. And
I'm sorry, repeat that again?
Well, your relationship, given your relationship with Danny Garcia and the court case and your participation in the case itself, tell us a little bit more about that sort of that event for you.
Yeah, so fortunately, I was not called in for court, and the good news is that there were a couple of other events that led to their arrest and the court and the evidence, and that was that the sale of the house triggered an incident where the title company reached out and said something wasn't right, and they actually sent a U-Haul to the house to take Cliff Lambert's things. So there was all these other bits of evidence that led up to their arrest, but I wasn't allowed to go to the trials because there was a slight chance that I would have been called as a witness because the manner that they withdrew the manner that they withdrew my money was the same way that Danny had withdrawn money from Cliff's account in a way of not raising any flags with the bank to freeze the account. But even that didn't stop them. When Danny went on a spending spree with Cliff's Amex card, they called and Danny answered and said, "No, that's me. I'm Cliff, and I'm spending this money." And so he, was able to continue spending the money on Cliff's cards.
Now, because had the prosecutor spoken to you about the good possibility or any possibility of you being called as a witness? Is that's why they said you have to stay away from this trial, because you are a witness, can't be influenced by evidence beforehand. So, but had they done any kind of preparation, or how confident were you going to be that you were a witness or not a witness in that trial?
I felt more or less, because I really didn't have anything to do with the murder itself and that particular case. So I wasn't. If anything, there would be obviously the case of Danny was going to initially claim that he and Cliff were in a relationship, and that Cliff had given him permission to use his bank accounts and his credit cards. And so there would be the possibility of me coming in and going, "That's funny, because he did the same thing to me and I never gave him that permission." Danny had also filed petitions to have, I think, around 200-something people subpoenaed to testify for him, and most of those were character witnesses. But it included Zsa Gabor. It included Oliver Stone's mother. All these celebrities that Cliff Lambert was familiar with, and they were all going to be character witnesses. And the judge actually said, "Look, Dan, I know you are your own attorney here, but I'll tell you, if you bring in one character witness, the prosecution will bring in hers." And that, I'm sure, would have been me as well.
Yeah, that would have been quite the circus. I mean, even the idea of contemplating some of those witnesses, Zsa Gabor, that's funny.
Yeah, but even after they had been arrested, even more things unfolded. And the one that caught the attention of a lot of people in San Francisco was the Rincon Hill scandal, as it's known now. And that is, they had, with the money that they had taken from Cliff, they had put down as sort of earnest money on a very expensive condo in the tallest condo building in San Francisco. And they then managed to transfer title fraudulently, and on paper and in the system, they owned this condo. They reached out to the Bank of Solvang, and the bank sent a representative over for a home equity line of credit. They saw the house. They tricked the realtor into giving them a key, and the Bank of Solvang believed that, in fact, they were the owners, and they gave them a $2 million home equity line of credit, and they immediately withdrew it. And as a result of that fraud coming to light, because they were arrested right after it, the bank went insolvent, and the FDIC picked it up, and you and I, as taxpayers, have also paid for that as well.
Incredible. Now, why do you theorize that these guys that were essentially cons felt it necessary to resort to murder? I mean, that's the one thing that I get out of this. I don't understand how collectively they were in agreement with this, that they would go that far. Now, it's also interesting, it's even unusual for guys to go, when they've committed such a crime, to be so high profile and go gamble and just squander the money as fast as possible, go through an incredible amount of money in short order. Why do you think that? Do you always think that murder wasn't always the plan, but why do you believe that they felt it necessary to include murder and not just steal and con and defraud.
Right. And I think it's like everything. Bank robbers get more brazen as they continue their crimes. The fact is that these guys were unstoppable. I mean, Couchon had even been arrested for his for being an illegal immigrant, and was released later on $5,000 bail. They just couldn't be stopped, and when they believed that Cliff was worth around $90 million, when in fact it was more like $900,000, but they figured if they had just kidnapped him and taken everything from him, that he would then finger them and they could actually get in trouble for this one, and it would be easier to just kill him and hide the body, and with using a power of attorney. And this is where, as part of their team, David Reffelgold being the lawyer, a power of attorney is good as long as someone is alive. The minute they're dead, a power of attorney no longer works. So his body remained hidden, and they proceeded to use their legal knowledge to pilfer and like the DA said, a vulture, take everything.
Yes.
But and so it was the progression, I guess, if you will, of being unstoppable. I almost think that especially Couchon wanted to live this James Bond lifestyle of being the bad guy, and just he would peel off $100 bills as tips, and he was just so flashy with everything, and that was the lifestyle he wanted to live, and wanted people to see him as just really more sociopathic, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But
certainly, that's pretty evident.
That's the message that we have in our book, Until Someone Gets Hurt, is not only do we have a system that for fraud that is needs to be relooked at, but that if any of your listeners out there are people are telling them stories that are a little too hard to believe, don't fall for it. People are going to unfriend you because you're not going to loan them some money. That's okay. So the real message here is that these stories that you're hearing are too good to be true. These Nigerian scams, the print scams, I'll send you a check and cash my check and I'll give you $1,000. It's all bogus. It's all fraud. Don't fall for it.
And the thing is, if you don't, you should be more wary of people, and there are ways of checking, especially checking on people and their backgrounds, and hence so that you can be more confident one way or another. And it's just your due diligence. You're talking about a lot of money. If you're talking a lot of money, and this is a good lesson in what can also happen. It might not just be theft. That might be just the least of the things that could occur to you as a result of interacting with some of these people.
Yeah, and again, this isn't just somebody who you met a week ago. This for me was somebody I'd known for 5 years. How did that happen?
Yeah.
And I looked back and there were signs, and of course I just ignored them because who does that?
No, but with their sign, but we're really, couldn't you say unequivocally that there were signs to indicate the entire future, or were there signs that he might have been dishonest and he might have been a thief?
No, it was more just the stories that he told. He told me that his parents had invented the core technology behind laser hair removal, and I never ever looked into it. I never, he said that they had come up with some new handheld device that they were selling in Japan, and yet I never saw that device, and I just, was like, oh, it does. But it all hit me, when I got back and discovered what he had done, and then it just, how you have those, movies, you see those people go through flashbacks. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And so you say you still have trust issues, but you're not taking this. You're just learning some lessons from this. This book must have been I guess, cathartic to a certain degree? I know that sounds like a cliche, but writing this book and talking about this book and talking about this story, is it really helping?
Yeah, you know, and working with Sherrie Lueder and Kim and Dawn, they were amazing. They had they were supportive through a lot of it. There were times where Sherrie would call me and she'd say, you know, sit down, I have something to tell you, and here's something we found, and shocking, but at the same time, now that it's out, it's a good release, if you will. So I think psychologically I'm okay, and I think the trust issues are probably better. They will keep it from happening again. That's for sure.
Now, how was it? What was the experience like in terms of working with Sherrie Lueder, best-selling author Sherrie Lueder, as the author of this book, and you, the co-author? What was the relationship like? Tell us about that experience in terms of what it consisted of. We had a lot of investigations, a lot of interviews. Sorry, not interviews. I had gotten all the contact info, and I found all these other victims, and Sherrie and Dawn and Kim. Everybody were calling. We recorded the conversations, transcribed them, and then it's funny when we put it together. I think we probably spent about 3 months trying to put it in order because it was so confusing, and there were so many different events. And then just when we thought we had it done, somebody else would call and tell us, "Hey, I read you guys are writing this. I have something to tell you." And so now we're figuring out where are we going to put that in there, and it was definitely a lesson in for me in terms of how difficult it is to write a book. It is not easy, and definitely Sherrie was crucial in that, and again Kim and Dawn's help in their interviews and the things that they dug up, and the 40,000 documents that were presented in court, and the 31,000 text messages, just so much information to go through, and it's great. They've become family now. Yeah, and it's a really fascinating. It is a really fascinating case. It's very unique, and I do these things all the time in terms of unique stories. This is very, very unique, and different motivations, and just incredible California, San Francisco, crazy scams and cons involving, again, you get Zsa Zsa Gabor and all kinds of characters, cast of characters, and the prince, and so it's a fascinating story. You can't write fiction like this stuff. It's just amazing. So I want to thank you very much, and I want to thank the literary team, like you said, Dawn and Kim, and Sherrie Lueder, of course, and yourself for putting this really, really spellbinding tale together here, and for you coming on, and Dawn and Kim helping arrange this interview, and having you come on and talk about this, your own personal experience in this incredible story. I want to thank you very much. Until Someone Gets Hurt by Tyson Wrensch and Sherrie Lueder. Thank you very much, Tyson Wrensch.
Thank you for having me, and I really appreciate it. Everybody be safe and be alert.
Yes, absolutely. Have a good night.
Good night.